Hello, and welcome to another episode of the B2B Leadership Podcast. I'm your host, Nils and today my guest is Chris Tazewell. Chris, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Nils.
Oh, my pleasure, Chris. Well, Chris and I are going to be talking today about leadership without a title. And one of the best ways we can start out is with how you became a guest on this show. Chris, would you kind of run us through a little bit of the sequence of events that led you to today where we're recording our episode?
Yeah, it's funny. It's actually perfect timing. Recently, I started Toastmasters and getting into public speaking, just improving my public speaking skills. And you happened to send me a DM about your ebook. And so I was actually reading through it. I've always been a fan of the podcast and was like, hey, I might as well shoot my shot and say, hey, Nils, if you're interested in having any emerging leaders, folks that want to come on your podcast, I'd love to have opportunity to join in. And so working through that process with you, kind of bouncing and spitballing ideas. Here we are.
Here we are, right? And this is the perfect example of the simple but profound phrase that is, when you take action, you get rewarded. Right? And maybe not every single time, but you got to take action in order to ultimately get rewarded. And I remember getting that. So I give away my free best-selling book, copies of it. And I emailed you, said, hey, would you like a free digital copy of my best-selling book? You said, yeah. And then you said, oh, I've always been a fan of your podcast. Mm-hmm. And you gave me that little intro. And I said, oh, cool. I'm always looking for new guests. What kind of topics are inspiring to you, or what would you like to share with the world? And you took a couple days and you thought about it and you came back with 3 really powerful ideas, and we selected one, and I was like, this would make an excellent show. So this never would have happened. I would never have, known who you were. You knew who I was because you listened to the podcast, but I wouldn't have known who you were, and I wouldn't have known that we're going to have this great conversation today if you hadn't taken action first. So a great example of how taking action gets rewarded.
Appreciate the opportunity.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. So leadership without a title, this was something that you presented to me as a possibility of a topic. So why was this important to you?
Oh, I think it's kind of been a staple of my career. I've typically always been one of the younger ones in a lot of the spaces I've been in. I had some experience early on in my career, actually managing a contact center and leading a sales team. Led a team of about 30 by the age of 24.
Wow.
Again, before that, I didn't have a title. I was actually just thinking of opportunities where I was like, hey, we can sell a little bit better or figure out how we're training up new hires. And I was just throwing out ideas just because I wanted to be helpful. And that's how I got my first opportunity into leadership. And I still see that translating now with my role here at Genesis, having opportunities not only as a co-president of our Black Employee Resource Group, but as well just in my role, trying to find opportunities to improve how CSMs are working with our customers, recreating best practices and all that stuff. So
hey, that's wonderful. And that common theme of identifying opportunities, making recommendations, trying out different ideas, trying to make improvements. I mean, that's really the underpinning of what we're talking about when it comes to leadership without a title. Now, you told me a brief bit of a story just recently that you put together an entire leadership summit. Would you take us through how that even started and then what the end result was? Because that seems like a pretty profound example of having taken extreme leadership and not having the title or necessarily the resources to do it all.
Yeah. So me and my co-president, we actually took in a couple surveys from our Black Employee Resource Group and our audience, trying to hear what are some challenges, pain points that they're having. What are they looking to improve upon? And so a big thing was professional development, having opportunities to grow, learn more, learn new skills. But, obviously in the corporate space, you don't always have the opportunity to have a new title or be a people manager. So we're trying to be cognizant about how can we figure out how we intersect those two opportunities. And so we came up with an idea. We pitched it to our CCO, who's our executive sponsor. And he said, it's a great idea. So we actually built out a leadership program for 30 attendees. And it was
how big, hang on, how big was this idea? Like you and your co-president were thinking about this and you're like, okay, like this could be gigantic, it could be tiny, it could be a lunch and learn, or it could be this huge summit. Like, how big were you thinking when you initially pitched it?
We were thinking pretty big. We wanted to start off with making sure that it was different. You know, you have a lot of mentoring programs, you have a lot of trainings, everything's been virtual so far. So we wanted to make sure that, hey, we need to have people in person. Close your laptops, no work. You actually are dedicated and devoted to your professional development. And so we wanted to make sure that we could have people come in. It was a global summit. So we had folks come from all the way from Australia. We had 6 people come from outside the States to Indianapolis for this event. So it was pretty exciting.
That is exciting. Now, so prior to this, like this was just the idea and the brainchild of you and your co-president. Like your CCO didn't come to you and say, Chris, we need to figure out how to bring everybody from around the world together and give them some leadership skills, right?
100%. Yeah, it's pitching an idea. Honestly, it was a shot in the dark. We were a little nervous, let alone the budget that we asked for. But, when you think about, you have to always put together, a use case, a business case. And so what we did with him, we were like, hey, this is what we were hearing in our employee experience surveys. This is what we're hearing from our audience as well. We see this as a great opportunity for us to build into the business and also put together what's the benefit for him as well. We're definitely focused on diversity, equity, and inclusion here at Genesis. And then as well, being able to also tackle how we work on building more leaders within the organization internally so that it just helps the business grow.
Well, and what I love is that you did the legwork, right? You did 90% of the work to make this summit become a real thing, from a shot in the dark to actually having a chance. And that's, I think, where a lot of people can get a little bit hung up, or maybe overwhelmed might be a different one. That, well, this isn't really part of my job. How much do I need to really do? But you put all the work in. You mapped it out, you scoped it out, you built the business case, not only for the company, but I love that you also said how it was going to benefit your CCO, right? Because we're all looking for how things are going to benefit us. And that must have been a huge turning point.
Yeah, it absolutely was. And it's funny, a lot of people always say, oh, this isn't in my job description, but are also asking for, new opportunities, leadership opportunities. I don't think it correlates. I think for you to step into new roles, you have to stretch yourself beyond what you're supposed to be doing. I think that's always just kind of the approach that I've had. It's not necessarily looking for recognition, but I want to just be able to add value wherever I'm able to. And so with that, sometimes you do get recognition. For example, I made President's Club last year, but, it doesn't always necessarily come with all the awards. Sometimes it's just a pat on the back knowing that you helped someone else. So just being able to have that drive just to want to create a change, I think that's where it starts.
And it's sometimes there is no recognition, right? Sometimes there's nothing. It's like, or you never hear about it, right? And our relationship here is a perfect example of that. So when you have a podcast, and anybody out there who owns and runs a podcast, you know what I'm talking about. You bring guests on, you have wonderful conversations, you share tremendous insights. There's a lot of value in each and every episode, but the amount of feedback that you hear is like crickets, right? I mean, the biggest shows and the Joe Rogans and there's probably a different story because they get talked about on social all the time, but the vast majority of the podcasts in the world, not exactly in that category. So when I put out a podcast episode, I know roughly how many people listen to it, but the amount of times people come back and say, that was really insightful, or this is what I took away, or here's what I got, like the real gratification of why do you do this is very, very small. But that can't be the reason why you do it, right? The reason why I do it is because I genuinely want to, one, connect with incredible leaders like yourself, and two, share some of my expertise in things in a fun and engaging way that's different from, everybody else out there. And that's why I do it. So if I get one listen or 1 million listens, it's really not the point, and I'm not looking for the feedback, but it is a really interesting thing to be on the receiving end of putting out something incredible, like a podcast episode like this, and then getting zero response, like literally zero response, aside from knowing how many people downloaded it.
As a leader, you start to realize that the recognition doesn't really come to you. For all the instances that you're in a leadership situation, all the praise goes to your team, and typically all the bad stuff goes to you. And so it's a humbling experience where you realize, like, hey, I'm not going to get a lot of pats on the back and awards and high fives about what I'm doing here. But I have to make sure that I understand what I'm working towards and making sure that I'm pouring into my team. And you really have to give more to your team because, it's like the telephone game. They lose a little bit as you pass the information along. So you try to give as much as you can so that, they're set up for success.
That's absolutely right. And it's one of the, going from an individual contributor to a leader where you are technically now a manager responsible for a group of people is one of the most difficult transitions anyone will ever make in their professional career. Sure. And the reason why is what you just highlighted, which is the focus shifts from you being in complete control and you getting all the accolades and everything about you to them. It's not about you anymore. And that sometimes is a really, really difficult transition to make. Not everybody makes it smoothly and successfully. And even I've worked with leaders at all different levels, all the way at the VP and C levels, and sometimes they still struggle with some of that transition piece. So this isn't just something that happens in the background once when you go from IC to manager. Like if you don't address the psychology side of leadership, then it's going to be much more difficult down the line in order to really step into it and be there and devote more to your team than you'll ever get back.
It's a complete paradigm shift. And I think you were spot on that it doesn't end with that first transition. Every time you step into a new role at a new organization or have a new team, that process starts over. And a lot of the time you're just figuring it out. As a leader, you have to really be able to zoom out, see a clear picture of what's going on in the landscape, and then be able to kind of create a vision. And then, of course, you influence the folks around you. It doesn't always come with the title. Oh, go ahead.
So that zooming out piece is really key. And so we're talking about, leadership without a title. So if we're talking about individuals or groups or teams or whatever in roles, sometimes the only thing you can see is the details and the weeds, because you're literally on the front lines doing the work, whether you're working with customers, whether you're working internally, whatever it is. So how have you been able to step back and been able to bring other people back out of the weeds when it wasn't necessarily even your place to do that?
Yeah, honestly, a lot of the time it's taking a step back, taking a breather, and asking questions. Like, why are we doing it this way? Have we thought of it this way? That's a great way for us to at least do a little bit of a pulse check. Are we on path? I think one thing that a lot of people overlook, especially being in the corporate space, is the all hands meetings that you have at corporate events. A lot of people just listen to it or have it in the background. They're multitasking, doing emails. They're literally giving you the whole strategy for the organization. And so being able to listen to that, hear what information is coming down the pipeline, where you're at as an organization, you also find opportunities where there might be gaps that you can help fill. And so try to make sure I listen. So I think the two things is really ask questions and listen.
Love it. Two of the most powerful leadership tools, period. And I love that you brought up the all hands, because that's the classic, right? That's the one where people like drone on about, oh, gotta go to all hands. Give me 90 minutes. What? Seriously? I can't take this. But then the best questions from them come afterwards, which is, I still don't understand where we're going. And if you legitimately paid attention and you still don't understand, that's okay. But most times it's probably because they were multitasking and doing something else and not totally engaged and asking questions and being part of it. So what I'm hearing you say is that the roadmap and the strategy and the big picture is always there, but not everybody sees it all the time. Is that right?
100%. And it's really making sure that you zoom out and you figure out where the trends are. Obviously, things can look really bad when you're zoomed in. You have your book of business and you have these customers on fire and there's just problem after problem. But if you take a step back and say, hey, well, I'm working with these customers and I'm starting to notice this is a trend in, the financial services industry. I have 3 financial industry customers and this is the issue that's coming up. That's where you start to see the trends and see the problems. And then now you can actually look from a leadership perspective and have vision of, how do we recreate a solution on a mass scale?
Okay, let's dig into that one. And let's say someone is in that situation, has their book of business, notices these things. What's your recommendation on how to surface that? Because sometimes the feeling is, well, I should just tell my manager that this issue is going on and they should be part of solving it or whatever. Then there's the leadership without a title, which is, am I responsible for solving that? Should I be? So how do you look at that kind of a situation if you were to identify a trend in that type of scenario?
I will say, so my thought process is always, if I bring up a problem, I should at least have thought about a solution. Okay. At least started thinking through a couple of scenarios and spitball some ideas to my manager or other people on my team. And so I think when you're looking at that, a couple of things you can do, obviously, is looking at the broader picture. Is there any categories that you can look at? For example, I mentioned industries, specific geographical regions, company size. Obviously the economy has been pretty volatile right now. So you might have some smaller customers where you might really need to keep an eye on them because they might not have as much, financial runway, and they might really be digging into how they need to consolidate their tech stack or reduce their costs. Then the same thing for larger organizations. They might be looking to optimize and condense some of their tech stack. So try to figure out where there's similarities and categories that you can bunch groups into so that you can make an informed decision so that, everything's not a one-off situation. We're a global organization. We can't, create a solution for every single one problem that each customer has. Like, you have to have, again, a business case around it. You have to see that it's impacting additional organizations so that you can figure out how do you attack the root cause, because there might be something deeper in there that you need to dig into.
Yeah, that is a great, it's a great alignment with what you have to do in a leadership position anyways.
Absolutely.
Right? So whether you have a title and you're technically manager, director, VP, CCO, whatever, C-level, or you're a person on the team fulfilling some role in the company, it's the same thing, right? The company's only going to move forward if we identify the challenges and problems and the patterns, most importantly, that you noted, and then come up with some creative solutions for how we can address it to the largest percentage of whatever is affected, and then present those solutions to the rest of our team or our leadership or whatever it is, just like you did with your leadership summit. Right? Yeah. I mean, it's really no different. So the fact that the title is there, I think we're just proving that it doesn't really mean anything when it really comes to leadership.
I mean, there's so many people that have a title and don't have the impact. They don't have the influence. That's what matters. Can you impact the team? Can you influence them to take action? And can you inspire them when times are hard, things are tough? Yeah. It seems impossible. That's where leadership is. I mean, it's funny because I think my first intro into leadership really came from football. I used to be the team captain of my football team in high school. Not the biggest, not the fastest, not the strongest. I didn't play D1, but I had a lot of heart, and I was going to be one of those people that led by example. So if I'm asking someone to do something, I'm going to do it as well. So we're running sprints after practice. We're in the weight room, making sure that we're eating healthy, doing what we need to do, go to class, just being that person. And you start to pick up on a lot of those qualities from, the leaders that are around you. I pick up on a lot of stuff from your podcast and leaders that I've had that continue to, manage me in the past. A lot of it's really just being open to learning more. Yeah. And you have to adjust to how your team is and what's going on in the situation.
I love that you called out the being open to learning more. And that's one of the things that I think is just paramount, no matter what industry, role, title, function you do. Yeah. That's it, right? That's at the core of it. And I shared a post on LinkedIn this week about how one concept I learned completely changed everything for me. And it was the very first class that I had in grad school. So I was never school was always a challenge for me. High school, undergrad, I got through, but it was not my sweet spot until many things happened many, many years later. I went to grad school, first night, go into class. And I mean, I haven't been in a classroom in 7 years, mind you. So I'm going back and I'm sitting in the desk and I'm like, wow, this is kind of a weird, trippy experience. So I sit down, and it was a management and organizational behavior class. And at this point in time, I literally had no idea what this class was about, but I was like, okay, I got put on the schedule by the people. And I said, sure. And I sat down, and in the first 30 minutes, there was just within that time frame, there was one concept that the professor shared that just blew my mind. It was so simple, but all of a sudden what it did was allowed me to look at the last 7 years of my professional career and see everything more clearly than I ever had before. And I understood why I left an organization that paid me next to nothing, and it wasn't because of the money. Right? Yeah. I understood why I didn't get promoted in another situation, and I could see these things clearly, but it was just that one concept. And had I, never gone through that experience or never gone through grad school or whatever, or not been open, like I was several years prior, not been open to learning more, I never would have seen the world in a different way. And those things are around us all the time, whether it's in a formal training event, like your leadership summit, like my leadership MBA program, or like something in my book. This is actually in the first chapter of the book. You probably read that, right? But that story was it just made the world of difference. And I couldn't even sleep that night. That's how exciting it was. And I just had never felt that before. And I knew it was there. I knew something was there.
Yeah, I love that. And, kind of as you think about, your career, obviously you have a little bit more experience than I do so far. What do you recommend to some of the emerging leaders, folks that want to get into, C-level positions?
Yeah, no, a single most important kind of core premise is that there is one investment that you will make that will pay exponentially greater and greater returns than any other investment you ever make in your entire life. And you can probably guess where I'm going. Yeah. It's the investment in you. Yep. Right? So, and I'll tell you exactly how this worked and how it translated for me, because I did not believe this for a long time. So from the point at which I graduated from undergraduate, I was about 22, to I was 29 when I started my MBA. So those 7 years, I was at an individual contributor level, and I bounced around from job to job to job and had no clue where I fit in the professional world. And also, like, my results showed, like, I just didn't really do that great of work. I fully admit that. I was not inspired. I didn't think I was really great. I didn't work really. I tried to work hard. Yeah. I just was always asking other people, what should I do? Like everything we're talking about in this first part of this conversation, I did the opposite. I was not in that position. And it was a part of who I was at that point in time and my evolution as a person. And that's as much as I can chalk it up to. So fast forward, when my daughter was born, there was something that changed very, very quickly. And that was the realization that if I was going to provide what I wanted to provide for my growing family and the future family wanted to have, I was going to have to get on the train and add a lot more value to the companies I work for and the things that the companies I work with, because something had to change. And that's why I decided to go to grad school, right? And so that investment in grad school was the start of my investment in myself. And since that point, which started when I was 29-ish, and so this was a lot of years ago, we'll just say that. Since that point, I've invested well over at least $500,000 of my own personal money. This is not company money. These are not programs. These are not grants, anything like that. This is my own personal money. Invested that in myself. I've worked with coaches. I've gone through training programs. I obviously went through an MBA program. I paid one coach who charged $1,500 an hour. I paid $15,000 for 10 hours of his time. And it was incredibly valuable because it got me what I needed, what I couldn't get on my own, right? I became a certified leadership coach way back in 2012, over 11 years ago. And I invested in that program many thousands of dollars that I did not have at that time. And I had 3 very young children, 1 newborn and 2 other young kids working in San Francisco, trying to make it all work. The only thing I could do was focus on acquiring more skills to add more value and ultimately increase what the pay was going to be for me, because ultimately that was the goal at the time, right? And it worked, right? During that program, I went from an individual contributor, then I got promoted to manager, then I became the director of that organization, and not too long after that became a VP, but only because I went outside of my companies. I went outside of my comfort zone. I found other programs and invested in myself. I said, this is a skill set gap I have. Who has the best kind of skills for this? How can I get those skills? And I will pay whatever it takes, even if I don't have it, and I'll figure out a way to make it work. So for those emerging leaders out there, if you are not currently investing in yourself, and I'm talking, beyond the books here and there, books are wonderful, 100%, but nothing compares to going through a live program, going through a coaching process with somebody else who's been there and done that, can help you just get results faster. And that's ultimately been the single greatest contributor to my success in the last 15 years. Wow.
I think that's spot on. I mean, yourself is the biggest investment that you can possibly make. And I think there's one other aspect to this leadership thing that I think about that a lot of people overlook. The second thing is relationships, people.
Yes.
You have to be able to collaborate, work with people, influence people. And that's where it's a lot of the time gets overlooked, where, you're having strategies, you're in a tough situation. You have to be able to galvanize people to make people want to fight, want to work towards this seemingly impossible task.
Yep.
I mean, that's the whole point of a leader. I mean, it's not, hey, you're standing on the ship and just pointing the direction and just make everybody just go. You have to get people excited and want to go. And so, working through relationships, understanding personalities and what makes people tick. I think the biggest example I saw, I was in my sales role prior to being a CSM, and I was managing a team. And obviously, in sales, most people are money driven. I had one individual that was not. They were perfectly fine with their base salary. And so you had to think through. I started asking her questions like, hey, what are you interested in? What is your goal for life? And she wanted to have a family. And so that was a big push for her. And so I made the connection for, hey, if you work really hard in sales, you can make X amount of money. So that's going to be able to allow you to support your family, your kids, do all the fun things you want to do. She loves shopping as well. So you have to find ways to connect the dots, even if it's not, hey, be number one in sales and sell as hard as you can. And it doesn't always work for people. I'm not necessarily a money-driven person. I understand the benefit of it, but if you want to really drive me, give me an opportunity to leave an impact.
Yeah, I could
to change something.
I could totally see that.
I'll take that all day. I'm always looking for opportunities and challenges to solve problems. I think I'm just a career problem solver.
I think that sums it up right there. Right? What is leadership without a title? Is being a career problem solver. Because there is one guarantee in leadership, and that is that problems will rise and show up each and every single day. And when those problems show up, if you have the right tools and the right strategies and the right psychology, it's no big deal, right? They're just the things you expect to come up every day. However, if a lot of the professional world, and especially those in leadership positions, have never gone through anything formal structured, like my leadership MBA program or like your leadership summit, and then leadership becomes really hard, because if you face problems without tools, it is really, really difficult, and it is not a very fun place to be, because you are going to fail constantly.
Yeah. And you really have to put yourself in challenging situations, whether, like you said, trying something new, trying a new curriculum and a program that's going to give you those skills, or if you're DIYing it and just throwing yourself in the fire and just figuring it out. It's funny. There was a quote that I read like last week, and it's pressure and stress are the same thing. It's all about perspective of how you look at it.
That's brilliant. That's so good. It is. Right?
And it's all about the training of what you have allows you to climb the mountain higher, so that you have a higher perspective. And so when there's tough situations that come on, pressure is a privilege in my opinion. It's an opportunity for you to grow, to beat the odds, to do something different. I love it. I love all those opportunities. And I think that's what makes a leader.
Yeah.
It's being able to do the tough things, and doing the tough things in the difficult times, and showing up there. Because it's funny, because a lot of people will say they're a great leader, and then the tough times come.
It's way easier to be a great leader in good times than it is in tough.
Yeah.
For sure.
It's what the Mike Tyson quote: everyone has a plan until they get punched in the mouth.
One of the all-time greats. Right?
That's where your character gets defined. That's how you get defined as a leader. Is how you're going to approach tough times. And being early in my career, that was one of the biggest bits of advice that I got from one of my mentors. He said, put yourself at the intersection of problems.
Yep. Love it.
Learn so much.
The best part, they're around all day, every day. There is no shortage. I guarantee, with you, with me, with every single other person who listens to this podcast ever, for now into eternity, there is no shortage of problems that are there. And the question is, are you going to engage in solving those problems, or are they going to be the problems you avoid and perhaps sweep off to the side, or say it's not mine, or say, maybe later? But when you dig in and you have a set of tools in order to help you solve these problems, then problem solving is a blast. Like becomes the fun part. Whether it's good times or bad becomes irrelevant. You just are able to engage, solve problems, and that's where the satisfaction comes from.
100%. And I think another idea just came to mind when we're talking about perspective. There's so many people that get to, a new organization, or for me, early in my career, I was like, oh, I'm too young. Like people won't listen to me. Everyone has a voice and a perspective. Being a leader is literally just, maybe you're asking a question that nobody's asking. You don't have to always come up with $1 million idea. It's literally asking a question that gets, someone else going. As a leader, you're not the one that's driving all the solutions. You're ideally putting your team in place to be able to help them do what's best for them, identify their strengths, and then be able to, create a problem, using teamwork ideally, and just bringing the best out of everyone else. But a lot of the time, that's where I think I really started to thrive early in my career. Was I'll join an organization and we're going through onboarding, and I'm like, we could do this a little bit differently. Or now I'm in the role, I just got out of onboarding, I didn't cover this. And so I started documenting some of this stuff and then just presented it to my manager. And we did have some documentation that was created, and ideally just making things better for the next person.
Love it.
There's so much value there.
We're cut from the same cloth, because there was the very first time I was a CSM a long time ago. The job I was hired as an account manager was the title, because CSM, like, this was before even the first Gainsight conference. This is how long ago it was. Okay. Long time ago. So the first day, literally the first day, I went in and I sat down, and the team had just been going through the last several weeks, mapping out the super detailed flow for their customer onboarding. And the only interaction I had had with this team so far was my interview process. And I knew one of the people on the team from before. He was the one who referred me into the interview to get the interview to start. And so they go through the presentation, and it was like a couple hours into the job. And we're sitting in the conference room. They go through this presentation. They have this visual up on the board that looks a little bit confusing. And they had this name at the top of it that was called the something methodology of something. Like, basically you were falling asleep before you got to the end of the title of it. And I raised my hand. I literally remember sitting there being like, okay, something has to change here. Yeah. And I raised my hand and I did what you said. I asked the question and I said, hey, what if we called it the customer roadmap to success? And everybody, like, literally, I was kind of in the back. Everybody literally turned around and was like, who's this guy? But that was what we ended up calling it, right? Yeah. And it was the first day, sub 4 hours that I was in there, and I just saw an opportunity to share an opinion that I had of something that would make it much more engaging and a whole lot more fun to talk about with our customers. And I just felt it was right. And so that was the problem that I solved. And just example, I love that you brought that up. Don't be afraid to ask the question that nobody else is asking. I asked the question, made a recommendation. The question was, why are we calling it that? But my job was to provide a recommendation, and they liked it. And that was what we ran with for several years. And I ended up using that term for many more years in my consulting business too.
Yeah, I love that. Because I think about so many situations early in my career where we're just doing things status quo. Everybody's just doing it.
Yeah.
Why are we doing it this way? Is there any rhyme or reason why we're doing it this way?
Just because we always have.
Yeah. Or is there an easier way to do things? And I think that's where there's a lot of value just asking that why question. I know in customer success, the 5 whys is always a great technique when we're working with our customers, but internally asking yourself this as well. Why am I doing this? Yeah. What am I looking to do? It really helps you kind of, I think it's like a compass for a leader. You help to find the direction that you need. But yeah, it's spot on.
Well, Chris, it's been an absolute blast talking all things leadership. We could go on for many, many hours, but we'll hit pause here until another time. Maybe we'll have to have you back and dig into another topic. It's been a pleasure. Thank you so much for sharing your advice and your recommendations and your expertise and your stories. It's just wonderful to get to know you, and this audience has appreciated it as well. I know. Where can people connect with you? Is LinkedIn the best place?
Yeah.
Include a link in the show notes for sure. But
LinkedIn's perfect. Chris Tazewell. Yeah,
cool.
LinkedIn is perfect. Chris Tazewell, Tazewell. Always get a lot of things because the E is silent. But yeah, LinkedIn if you want to connect, chat, and definitely appreciate the opportunity, Nils.
Hey, my pleasure. And thank you again for taking action, taking a risk, saying, hey, I'd love to be a guest on your podcast, and then just coming up with the ideas. And this is a wonderful topic. And I appreciate the conversation so much. So thanks, and I'll talk to you soon.
Absolutely. Thank you.